He replaced his wife with his mistress at an elite gala. But what he didn't see that night was already the beginning of the end. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps this channel grow. Now let's begin. The envelope arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, thick and cream-colored, sealed with a gold insignia that reflected wealth before it was even opened. Amara picked it up from the marble-topped console table in their Ikoyi home, her fingers pausing briefly over the raised lettering. The house smelled faintly of jasmine and polish, the kind of calm that came from years of carefully built comfort. She read the words slowly, letting each one sink in. An invitation to the Echelon Legacy Gala. Black tie. Exclusive. Couples only. Her heart lifted in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't just any event. It was the kind of gathering that made quiet statements about arrival, about belonging. Amara imagined herself standing beside her husband, Colonel Adebayo, cameras flashing, their names spoken together. She imagined that feeling of being seen as a unit again. Colonel entered the living room moments later, dressed casually but already carrying his phone like an extension of his hand. Amara turned the invitation toward him, excitement softening her voice as she told him about the gala. She watched his face carefully. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. It was polite, measured, distant. He congratulated himself more than he acknowledged her, muttering about networking and visibility. He talked about who would be there, which CEOs, which investors, which tastemakers. Amara listened, nodding, telling herself not to overthink the fact that he never once said they would look good together. Still, she held on to hope. The gala felt like an opportunity. A chance to step back into his world properly, not just as the woman waiting at home. What she didn't notice was the way Colonel's attention drifted back to his phone, or the faint smile that appeared when a new message lit up his screen. The day of the gala arrived wrapped in soft Lagos sunlight and quiet anticipation. Amara spent hours preparing, not out of vanity but intention. She chose a deep emerald gown that hugged her gently, elegant without trying too hard. Her makeup was subtle, her hair sleek and understated. She looked like herself, polished, grounded, real. When Colonel finally came into the bedroom, he paused at the doorway, scanning her the way one inspects a room rather than a person. He said she looked fine. Not stunning. Not beautiful. Just fine. As they prepared to leave, Colonel adjusted his cufflinks and mentioned, almost casually, that there was something he needed to do first. A quick stop. A brief errand. Nothing important enough to delay her. He suggested she go ahead to the venue and settle in. He would meet her there shortly. The words sounded harmless, but something about the way he said them felt rehearsed. Amara hesitated, asking if they shouldn't arrive together. He brushed off the idea, explaining how late arrivals made more impact anyway. He spoke confidently, as though this arrangement benefited them both. She agreed, though her stomach tightened. Trust had taught her to quiet instincts like this. As her driver pulled away, she looked back at the house, expecting to see Colonel stepping into his own car. Instead, she saw nothing. Just the gate closing slowly behind her, sealing off a decision she didn't yet understand. Colonel watched from inside, phone already in hand, sending a message that made him smile in a way Amara hadn't seen in months. Colonel didn't head toward the island where the gala was being held. He drove in the opposite direction, toward a high-rise apartment overlooking the lagoon. The concierge greeted him warmly, already familiar with his face. He took the private elevator up, straightening his jacket as anticipation replaced guilt. She was waiting for him. Zara. She stood by the window, city lights beginning to glow behind her, dressed in champagne silk that clung to her like intention. Everything about her was curated: the posture, the accent she used selectively, the smile that suggested she belonged anywhere she entered. Colonel felt taller beside her. Sharper. Important. She teased him about timing, about how couples-only events were inconvenient. He reassured her easily, telling her she deserved to be seen. He spoke about Amara as though she were an obstacle rather than a person, someone who wouldn't fit into the room the way Zara would. In his mind, the comparison was settled. Zara was glamorous. Zara was modern. Zara knew how to hold a room. Amara, he told himself, belonged to an older version of his life. As they drove toward the venue together, Kunal imagined the looks they would get. He imagined admiration, validation. He imagined finally stepping into the world he believed he deserved, without having to explain the woman beside him. He didn't imagine consequences. Amara arrived at the venue just as the sun dipped below the skyline, the building glowing with understated opulence. Crystal lights shimmered overhead, and soft music floated through the air like an unspoken promise. Couples moved together effortlessly, laughter blending with the clink of glasses. She stood alone. She checked her phone. No message. No missed call. A hostess welcomed her warmly, guiding her to the reception area. Guests smiled politely, eyes lingering for half a second too long before searching for the man who should have been at her side. Questions came gently, wrapped in small talk, asking where her husband was, whether he was running late. Amara smiled through each one, offering vague answers. She told herself he would arrive any moment. Then she heard his laugh. It was unmistakable, confident, familiar, too close. She turned slowly, her breath catching as she saw him across the room, not alone, not searching for her, but seated comfortably at a VIP table. His body angled toward another woman, his attention fully given. His hand rested possessively on the back of her chair. The woman laughed, tossing her hair, perfectly at ease. Amara's world narrowed to that table, that moment, that realization. The seating arrangement felt cruel in its precision. Amara was led to the same table, positioned just far enough away to be seen but ignored. She took her seat with grace, refusing to let her hands shake. Zara noticed her first. Her eyes flicked briefly, curiosity flashing before composure returned. Kunal followed her gaze, his expression tightening for a fraction of a second before smoothing out. No apology came. No explanation. Conversation flowed around the table, people discussing art, investments, destinations. Amara listened quietly, absorbing everything. She noticed how Zara exaggerated certain words, how her stories felt rehearsed. She noticed how Kunal leaned in eagerly, laughing louder than necessary. When someone asked casually about Kunal's wife, the question landed like a stone dropped into water. Kunal answered easily, his tone dismissive, explaining that Amara wasn't really suited for events like this. He spoke about taste, exposure, class. He used the word local as though it were a flaw rather than an identity. Amara sat still, every word imprinting itself on her chest. She realized then that this wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. And the night was only beginning. The table glittered with crystal and polished silverware, reflecting the soft, ambient light of the gala hall. Every detail spoke of money and meticulous planning, the kind of elegance that seemed to intimidate even seasoned socialites. Amara slid into her seat at the far end, feeling the chill of absence before even noticing her surroundings. The table seemed alive with movement. Conversations hummed in tones too light to carry true warmth, laughter that sounded more like a performance than expression. She felt like a ghost invited to watch a life she had helped build unravel. Across the table, Kunal leaned toward Zara, his hand casually brushing the silk of her arm, the gesture intimate in a way that made Amara's chest tighten. He laughed at things she said that weren't particularly funny, leaning in to hang on every rehearsed word. Amara watched him, every detail sharp, the way he tilted his head when she spoke, the sparkle in his eyes that had vanished for her years ago. The contrast between how he looked at Zara and how he had looked at Amara made her pulse thrum in a bitter rhythm. Zara noticed Amara but didn't acknowledge her. She wore a smile that was all strategy, one that demanded attention without asking for it. Her presence was a statement, I belong here, more than she ever could. Amara tried to breathe normally, pretending the blush of embarrassment was from the heat of the room. Inside, a storm raged. This wasn't just humiliation. This was a public dismantling of the life she thought she shared with him. Other guests approached the table intermittently, nodding politely to Kunal and Zara, oblivious to the silent tension across from them. Amara answered questions with calm courtesy, allowing herself only inward observation, noting how Zara repeated phrases Kunnel had once adored in her voice, phrases she had long abandoned. Every glance from him toward Zara was a reminder of what she had lost, not just as a wife, but as a partner who had once been central to his life. The music shifted to a slow jazz piece. Candlelight reflected on polished wine glasses. Amara allowed herself a quiet, internal tally of the betrayals she had witnessed. She noticed how his laughter now felt performative, louder than necessary, almost triumphant in the way it ignored her presence. It became increasingly clear that the gala wasn't a shared celebration. It was a stage, and she had been cast as a mere background prop. Yet realize it. Amara shifted slightly in her seat, allowing her eyes to follow the play of reflections in the crystal and polished silver. She noticed every detail, the slight imperfection in the stem of a wine glass, the way Zara's hand moved deliberately, almost choreographed, across the table. The soft curves of the room, the chandeliers dripping with light, the murmuring of conversations around them, it all formed a perfect frame for her humiliation. She thought about how Kunnel had once admired the way her hands moved, the subtle gestures that revealed thought and care. Now, those same gestures were seen through the lens of absence, rendered irrelevant by contrast with Zara's performative elegance. Every movement, every gesture, every polite laugh from Amara was filtered through his shifting attention, always returning to the woman he had decided could replace her. The realization struck with a cold precision. She was invisible not by accident, but by intention. Amara tried to focus on the setting itself, the richness of the linens, the depth of the centerpieces, the subdued golden glow that softened the edges of a room built to impress, but even beauty seemed cruel in context. Each detail reflected a life she had helped him build and now existed without her. The irony was bitter. The same environments that once gave them shared pride were now instruments of exclusion. Kunnel, seemingly unaware of the interior collapse of the woman across the table, continued his easy conversation with Zara. She laughed, leaned in, and adjusted the neckline of her gown as if showing off its elegance. Amara watched, noting how familiar some of the movements were, almost echoes of the way she had carried herself in these same spaces years ago. He didn't notice, or maybe he did and preferred the mimicry, seeing it as a triumph. Either way, the weight of observation became a private reckoning, a collection of every small betrayal stacked neatly before her. Soft whispers began to thread through the gala, subtle but perceptible. Guests leaned in, speaking with lowered voices, exchanging glances toward the table. Amara realized they were talking about her, about Kunnel, about the discrepancy between appearances and reality. A friend she had known for years passed by, nodding politely, their eyes carrying a question that demanded no answer but landed nonetheless. Each murmur, each sideways glance, became a drumbeat amplifying her awareness that this was no longer private. Zara, fully attuned to every movement, noticed the whispers too. She adjusted her posture, smoothed her hair, laughed again, more deliberately this time. Amara observed her with quiet precision, noting how every action was calculated to maintain dominance. Nothing about Zara felt accidental, nothing organic. The ease she projected was weaponized, designed to make the space feel like it belonged to her alone. Kunnel, seated as the apparent center of power, failed to notice, or refused to notice, the storm he had orchestrated. He had convinced himself that Zara's presence was natural, that the room would see them together as ideal. But the whispers were not admiration. They were judgment, curiosity, suspicion. Amara began cataloging them internally, each a reflection of the cracks forming around him even as he remained oblivious. She realized the truth. The gala was no celebration. It was an arena, and she was still inside it, forced to observe the collapse of the life she once knew, forced to sit quietly while those who should have respected her now questioned the man she loved. Amara shifted again, adjusting her posture, her eyes scanning the table, the room, the chandeliers reflections in polished silver, and finally resting on Kunnel and Zara. The sight burned with a strange intensity, the intimacy, the performative gestures, the soft touches that had once been hers. She felt the room shrink, felt time stretch, and yet the world continued moving around her. She thought of years spent investing in the man now seated beside someone else. The mornings of quiet support, the nights of patient listening, the sacrifices unnoticed because they were silent. She remembered the little things he had loved once, the way she cooked, the way she laughed, the subtle elegance in small gestures. Now, each memory was a contrast to what she saw, a sharpened edge in the ongoing humiliation. Amara did not cry. She did not speak. She did not flinch. Her calm became a quiet weapon, a silent reckoning that only she understood. The room, with all its opulence, all its crystal and silver, all its murmuring guests, became irrelevant. The betrayal was not in the whispers or in the pointed glances. It was in the absence of the man she had trusted. It was in the casual way he had replaced her presence with someone curated, someone performative, someone he considered worthy. The night stretched onward. The orchestra played. Champagne glasses clinked. Connell laughed again, leaning close, smiling, basking in the reflection of what he thought he had won. And Amara, seated quietly, cataloging every gesture, every whisper, every small betrayal, realized that she was already beyond him. Her reckoning had begun silently, in the stillness of observation, in the quiet accumulation of truth. She had lost nothing that truly belonged to him, and for the first time, she understood the extent of the freedom betrayal could offer. Amara had been sitting quietly for what felt like hours, although the night was still young. The orchestra's soft rhythms threaded through the gala hall, the music a seductive mask for all the tension, the way he leaned in eagerly, clearly drinking in the attention. Amara's fingers traced the rim of her champagne glass, not drinking. Each swirl of the golden liquid seemed to mirror the swirl of thoughts and memories flooding her mind. She remembered the first time Connell had introduced her to this world, years ago, before he began to drift. Back then, he had been captivated by her authenticity, her laughter, her ease in a world of curated appearances. Now, in the same room, he seemed suffocated by her naturalness, as if it were a liability, a reminder of the past he wanted to erase. She noticed subtle whispers from nearby guests, their glances toward her and then Connell, picking up the tension but misunderstanding its origins. People assumed she was out of place, ill-prepared, shy. The irony was bitter. She had been everything he had once desired, everything he had promised he loved, and now the world was being fed a narrative carefully orchestrated by him. Her mind shifted to Zara, who was performing her role perfectly. Every laugh, every gesture, every casual brush of her hair, every tilt of her shoulder, was calculated for impact. It struck Amara how rehearsed it all felt, almost unnatural. Her chest tightened as realization settled fully. Connell wasn't with her because she had failed, but because he had convinced himself that this imitation, this crafted version of allure, was superior. The thought could have broken her, but instead, it ignited a strange clarity. She saw the truth, not the illusion. Amara shifted in her seat, straightening her back, and for the first time that night, she stopped trying to explain herself to anyone. She stopped smiling politely. She existed fully in that moment, absorbing every slight, every betrayal, every whispered assumption. The gala had become a theater, but she was no longer the actor. She was the observer, cataloging everything with precision, every detail filed away for the reckoning that would come later, beyond this room. Time passed, though it was measured less by the clock than by the tension between the trio at the table. Connell's composure remained steady on the surface, but cracks were forming beneath. The softest of sighs from Zara, the subtle impatience in her gestures, the way she leaned slightly too far forward when speaking, betrayed the strain of maintaining perfection. She was beautiful, polished, captivating, but even the most deliberate performance cannot mask small fractures. Amara noticed first. She saw Zara's hand tremble just slightly as she reached for a glass of water. She saw her eyes dart momentarily to Connell, seeking affirmation. She saw the faint bite of frustration when he complimented her hair, but neglected to acknowledge the small detail she had worked hard to perfect. The whispers around the table intensified, subtle but unmistakable. Guests leaned in just enough to observe, speculating silently about the odd dynamics. Connell's polite laughter now sounded sharper, more strained. He began gesturing more animatedly, as if overcompensation could smooth over the growing tension. Amara, seated quietly, watched it all unfold. She realized that the fantasy he had sought, this perfect image of the glamorous mistress, was already showing signs of instability. Zara's elegance was brilliant but fragile. Her confidence was dependent entirely on Connell's approval, and Amara could see how thin the veneer was. She felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, not joy, but acknowledgement of truth. Perfection crafted for show can never replace substance built over years. She let herself breathe, finally, letting the room spin around her. While the orchestra swelled, while the glasses clinked, while whispered observations flitted from guest to guest, she felt the first hint of control since arriving. She was still seated at the edge, still quietly observed, but her mind was free. And she began to understand that control, once taken from her, could be reclaimed in patience, in observation, in the quiet certainty that the truth always surfaces. The morning after the gala did not arrive gently. It came loud and sharp, carried on glowing phone screens and relentless notifications. Connell woke to the soft hum of his penthouse curtains parting automatically, sunlight spilling across marble floors that suddenly felt too cold. His phone vibrated again on the bedside table. Then again. Messages, tags, missed calls. He reached for it with the lazy confidence of a man expecting admiration. What greeted him instead was unease. The photos were everywhere. Crisp, professionally lit images from the gala circulated across social platforms, business blogs, private group chats. He looked immaculate, powerful, seated beside Zara like a prize he had won. But the comments beneath the images told a different story. People weren't praising his success. They were asking questions. Where was his wife? Why did she look so calm in the background? Why did the woman beside him seem tense? Why did the room feel divided? Connell scrolled, his jaw tightening. Private messages followed. A senior partner postponed a lunch meeting indefinitely. Another connection replied to his proposal with polite distance instead of enthusiasm. Invitations slowed. The familiar warmth in conversations cooled. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The room he thought he owned was quietly closing its doors. Zara noticed first. She always did when attention shifted. She paced the living room, heels clicking against the floor, irritation radiating from her movements. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and restless. She reminded him of the life he had promised her, of rooms that stayed open, of admiration that did not come with whispers. Her words carried disappointment now, edged with embarrassment. She spoke of friends who had seen the photos, of half-invitations that arrived with awkward pauses, of conversations that ended too quickly. Connell listened, but his confidence no longer anchored him. Her complaints landed differently. Once, they had sounded like ambition. Now, they sounded like pressure. He realized she wasn't upset about him. She was upset about perception. As the day stretched on, the penthouse grew quieter. Zara retreated into silence between bursts of frustration. Connell sat alone, scrolling through images that no longer felt flattering. In every photo, he saw performance. Every smile looked rehearsed. Every pose felt hollow. For the first time, the applause he had lived for was gone. And in its place was something far more unsettling. Silence. A silence that exposed how fragile his world was without approval, without admiration, without the woman he had erased to make room for illusion. The house greeted Connell with silence, so complete it felt intentional. The gates closed behind him with a dull finality, and for the first time in years, the Ikoyi home felt unfamiliar. Not abandoned, emptied. The air carried the faint trace of jasmine polish, but without Amara's presence, it felt like a memory instead of comfort. He loosened his tie slowly, as though delaying the realization that nothing would answer him here. He moved from room to room, noticing absences rather than objects. The throw pillow she always adjusted before sitting. The quiet hum of her voice on phone calls she kept low and respectful. The kitchen, pristine but lifeless, no soft clatter of plates, no scent of food prepared with care rather than show. Even the light felt different, harsher without her tendency to soften it in the evenings. He sat on the edge of the bed and let his thoughts wander backward, uninvited. He remembered the early days when ambition was all he had and she had believed without evidence. The nights she stayed awake listening to plans that never materialized, never laughing at the scale of his dreams. The way she defended him in rooms where he was invisible, introduced him with pride when he had nothing to offer but potential. She had never needed applause. She had never needed performance. His phone rested heavy in his palm. Reaching out felt instinctive, almost reflexive, like muscle memory. He typed her name, paused, erased the first message, then tried again. The words felt inadequate, stripped of authority, stripped of charm. He sent something brief, something careful. Then he waited. Minutes stretched. The house answered with stillness. He tried again later, this time more deliberate, more exposed. The message sent, the silence returned. No anger arrived. No accusations. No long paragraphs outlining his failures. Just absence. A clean, devastating absence that told him more than rage ever could. He leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling, and understood the cruelty of it. She was not fighting him. She was not begging. She was not demanding explanation. She had simply removed herself from the space he no longer knew how to inhabit alone. The realization settled slowly but completely. The woman he had lost was not the one who attended galas or fit into curated rooms. She was the one who made emptiness feel like home, who stayed when belief was inconvenient, who never needed to pretend to belong. And now, in the quiet he had earned, Connell understood the cost of mistaking presence for replaceability. Months passed, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the slow certainty of time that no longer waited for Connell. The noise that once filled his life had thinned out, no late-night calls, no curated laughter, no forced admiration. Zara had disappeared quietly, leaving behind nothing but a few unread messages and the faint embarrassment of a chapter that had burned bright and ended fast. The illusion he chased had collapsed the moment it no longer served her. He saw Amara on an ordinary afternoon he had not prepared for. It was at a corporate charity unveiling, one of those refined spaces where power moved without announcement. She stood among executives and board members, listening more than speaking, her presence steady and unforced. There was no spectacle about her, no performance. And yet people gravitated toward her naturally, addressing her with respect that did not need reinforcement. She wore confidence the way she always had, quietly, without decoration. Connell watched from a distance, unnoticed. He saw how people leaned in when she spoke, how her words carried weight because they were never rushed. The woman before him was unchanged in essence, yet transformed in position. She had not reinvented herself. She had simply stepped into spaces that no longer required her to shrink. Someone laughed beside her, touched her arm briefly in camaraderie, not possession. Amara smiled easily, not the careful smile of survival, but the relaxed one of belonging. Connell felt something tighten in his chest, not jealousy, not anger, but recognition. This was the woman who had stood beside him when respect was hypothetical. This was the woman he had dismissed as insufficient. She did not see him at first. And when she eventually did, her gaze paused only briefly. There was no shock, no triumph, no resentment. Just acknowledgement. A nod. A moment. Then her attention returned to the life unfolding in front of her. That was when the regret truly settled. Not loud. Not cinematic. Just heavy. The absence of the mistress, the silence of empty rooms, the collapse of social applause had stripped everything back to truth. He had mistaken visibility for value. He had confused performance with worth. And by the time he understood the difference, the woman who embodied it had already moved on. He didn't lose his wife because she was too local. He lost her because he forgot her worth until she was gone. If you enjoyed this story, don't scroll past it. Like to show support. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And follow for stories that tell the truth.